It's nice to see you all. It's always a lot of fun getting the opportunity to share what we've learned over the last year, and we've got a lot of great Farming Smarter speakers that are eager to also share what they've been learning. And I've kind of been off gallivanting for the last couple of years, which, it sounds like fun, but it actually stressed me out to the point where I just stopped shaving. So that's what led to my beard, and the kids actually liked it, so what the heck, we're going with it. So just about got a number of things off my chest, and I think this is going to have to go because I really don't like it. So I originally kind of reached a point in my career where I felt like I was beating my head against the wall, running the not-for-profit, trying to fill the shoes of Alberta agriculture and keep the momentum going for I think, which is the best agricultural area in the world. So I thought I'd go out and see if I could find other organizations that were farm focused and figure out how they were running and how they were funding and dealing with politics more than anything. Took off on this adventure and found out that there weren't too many flourishing not-for-profits around the world. So I kind of shifted gears a little bit and switched it more just looking to that on-farm innovation system. And various different countries have different approaches to how they support farmers. So I'm going to share basically my key take-homes from 10 weeks of travel across the world. This is my favorite new bias now, the Dunning-Kruger effect. So this is where you start to learn something and you have lots of confidence, and then you kind of reach that peak. So I was pretty close to that valley of despair, maybe upwards a little bit. The slope of enlightenment there is actually, in my opinion, a little bit lower than that top peak. And I think that's just the more you learn, the more you know, you realize that you don't know. And this is just a crazy world that we try to survive in. As a science purist, I started off my career really interested in the science because they were more concrete. And then when you start to gain a little bit of wisdom, you realize that people are a really important part of that all. And you're not always logical, and we have to figure out how do we all work together and create these systems. So my big contention, or my big premise right now, is that our entire innovation system in agriculture for Canada is broken. And I think that it's important that we address that. It's our livelihood. We just heard a talk on how important and a great opportunity land is in Canada, and I think we're not investing in it appropriately. Even Robert himself, he's looking for farmers that are taking care of the land, that will sustain and move forward. So this isn't an area that I feel we can, get lazy on and slack off on. So I applied for the Nuffield Scholarship, which originated in the UK and was supported by the Alberta Grains folks as well as Farming Smarter. So thanks to them for encouraging me to take the time, and thanks to my staff and crew that were able to run the show when I was sometimes gone. I ended up visiting a number of countries around the world, but I ended up seeing, focusing in on the science institutions. So it was everything from some not-for-profits, some government institutions, some at arm's length government institutions, some retails, some Crown Research, and producer checkoffs, kind of a good mix of those different approaches. And, there's different approaches all over the place. So I visited, I started off in Europe, which is highly subsidized. It's very much a different culture. Obviously, lots of environmentalism in Europe. And the complete opposite, basically, was in New Zealand, where in the late 80s, they got rid of almost all subsidies. So it was a really great contrast to see those two countries. Ironically, New Zealand is also about the same size as Alberta, both in land mass and in population. Probably the highlight of my adventures was a trip to Zimbabwe, and nowhere would you see such a different experience, where it used to be the breadbasket of Africa, and you talk about land potential. If they could get their geopolitical stuff in order, they can produce 2 crops a year. They've got loads of land. So a totally different perspective when you think about land, and you wonder why there's lots of Chinese investment in Africa, and that's exactly why. I also took a quick trip to the Niagara area, where I was able to find one flourishing not-for-profit called Vineland in the horticultural industry. And then throughout those adventures, because Nuffield is really a network of crazy ag enthusiasts around the world, there were people from a lot of other countries, and I learned just as much visiting with them and having those folks visit me. I even have another person from Australia coming in March, and I think that was a valuable experience because you get to see your world through the eyes of others, and it's quite valuable. So I'll start off with, is innovation simply trying something new? Pause for a drink. Well, I tried eating Mopane worms. Does that make me an innovator? Maybe. It makes me courageous, I think. Be honest with you, it tasted like shit. But I tried another one at a different place, and it had some different flavoring, so it wasn't bad. So, it's a lot about innovation. It's a character, it's a quality, and it's, relentlessly attacking an idea. So no, I don't think that simply trying something new is innovative. And I think that we get caught up in a lot of shiny new ideas that are often what's new and innovative. So people think of something new as innovative, and I think that part of what I'd like to share is that it's not. And I also found that a lot of people don't even understand what innovation means. Is innovation and science interchangeable? And you can see they've even got their horse blinders on there too, if you didn't notice. So we always think technology is going to save the world, and yes, I'm a proponent of technology, but it seems to me that we're kind of a little bit overly focused on technology saving, being the future of agriculture. The funny thing, after my 10 weeks of travel, this is getting towards the end, a beautiful Lake Taupo in northern New Zealand. It's a volcanic lake. The aha moment that I had wasn't after visiting the world record barley holder or an amazing entrepreneur that started a birdseed empire. It was coming out of the bathroom at a restaurant in this Lake Taupo. I saw a picture of this goofy looking guy. Bill Gallagher. Now you want to talk about innovation. First of all, he started off with an invention, and he's a creative guy, and he bought this fancy little car called an Edison car, I think, and he had a horse named Joe that incessantly liked to rub its rump on the fender and kept bending the fender of his car. So he electrified it and zapped the shit out of that horse, and it never touched the car again. So that's an invention. Where it became innovative was that he saw applying that to the electric fence. Now that's a technology that's been used for almost 100 years now and has created a tremendous amount of value to all farmers, even to this day. So then I came up with my own definition of innovation. So I believe that innovation is a system that begins with passionate, creative, and fearless people, with courage, determination, and persistence with a need or vision. This is a culture. Next, a process must be succinctly and efficiently implemented that includes, I can't even read this backwards, building a knowledge network, exploring, designing, and testing ideas with feedback and iterative adaptation, evaluating, tweaking, or even starting all over, all while considering risks, costs, and revenue. Success comes with relentless effort, and value accrues through adoption. So innovation is about culture, process, adaptation, and adoption. Some important concepts that I think both our leaders in this industry and the farmers and everybody involved need to get a better understanding and help build that system that functions. So I visited, one of my first stops was actually in Scotland, and met with a young woman who was involved with the Soil Association, and they were involved in on-farm research essentially, or living lab type style work. So Anna here was tickled pink because it was actually quite popular, and the idea was basically they got a grant, and then farmers could apply to do on-farm research through them, and they would pair them up with a scientist who would come and collect data and sort of make it a simple process. I think what's different than what we have here is the fact that it's given to them in a flexible way, and it's truly on-farm research and not the type that we like to brag about here. So some of the feedback that they had was that, having researchers show up and sort of take the guesswork out of data collection was a game changer. They had just celebrated a 10-year anniversary, and she's like, yeah, people are dying to give us money to support this effort. So I kind of felt like this was a really good example of a simple program that enabled, I think, the true innovators of the ag industry, which is the farmers. And we always forget, right now, all of the funds in agriculture are going towards innovative businesses, small and medium enterprises. There's whole streams of grants and venture capitalism that are supporting businesses trying to fit into agriculture rather than supporting the grassroots innovators like many of you are here in this room. So that was kind of cool. This was actually in Carlow, Ireland, and a group called Chagas. So having lived through the majority cuts of Alberta agriculture, Ag Canada not even involved in extension anymore, it was really weird to see a country doing the exact opposite that we are. So this organization started in about 1989 and has built a network of research institutions, colleges, universities, advisory regions in the country that has 22% the land base of Alberta. They've got crop specialists. They basically built what we had. And so that was kind of an eye-opener. It's like, what's going on that Ireland has a bigger support system for agriculture than we do? And I think there's different pressures. They've got the European Union support. They've got all of these environmental policy challenges, but that was just a bit of a wake-up call for what's happening in Europe, for example, as far as investment compared to us. I visited France, and that was also very interesting. This was a university where their ag students all have to take a internship abroad. So we actually at Farming Smarter have had a number of exchange students from France, but to meet with the college professors and understand what's going on, they really take their agriculture serious in France. They're very passionate, they work hard. But I thought, what a great idea for our universities to engage in. And even on a work exchange side, it's such a good opportunity to step aside from your day-to-day and learn something in a different context. I feel like we actually had a lot to share with the people in France because they're so policy heavy. Their farming systems are actually incredibly perturbed by that. And this is actually a picture of a soil conservation demo. So believe it or not, that moving to a high-speed disc, that's a step forward in soil conservation for them. And so that think about what I could add to them, having sort of taken my career through the zero tillage front. And you talk about climate change, they're getting drier. Now they're starting to irrigate when they don't have the ability to do so or the knowledge to do so. But at the same time, they have this tremendous disconnect from the science and research group. So I met with a group of farmers. It was a local club where they're out sharing conservation ideas and what to me was like raping and pillaging the land. But they were talking about cover crops, and I had just visited a massive research center down the road, and not one of them knew anything about what was going on there. So I think that's pretty universal. No matter where we go, the science seems to be separate from the farmers, and that's a big problem. And that's kind of why we exist as an organization. This group, though, however, we're trying to help as a private retail. We're helping farmers understand soil conservation, and they even set up their own farm, and they set up their own certification for different levels of conservation adoption. So if you were at the top, that they had a 3-level conservation, then you got that badge of haute valeur environnementale. I visited a checkoff group in New Zealand. That was kind of weird being sort of a crop-focused guy, and they're very much dairy and sheep is their two big, wow, I got to speed change up here. So basically, checkoff is anything that goes through a combine. And I thought probably the neat thing from this group that we don't have is the fact that anything that goes through a combine, they do work together, and they also support like novel crops that don't always get attention. I think we're very siloed into specific crops. You son of a bitch. Ooh, did I say that out loud, George? There's a microphone in front of me. You did panic me a fair bit there. Anyways, the other thing they do is every 5 years, they basically have a referendum to decide whether the organization moves forward. So rather than having a voluntary checkoff, it's a mandatory checkoff, but every 5 years they can say yay or nay to the organization. Puts a little pressure on them to perform. I mentioned Vineland in Canada, and I think this was the best example of a not-for-profit that really was doing a great job at serving the industry needs. It used to be a Government of Canada organization. They moved it to the University of Guelph, and it failed miserably, so they turned it into a not-for-profit. And with at least about a 50% grant from the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, they've done really well. They've got about $11.5 million to run the organization. So it's kind of the group that I would model for our organization in the future. And I always say that a not-for-profit can operate with the efficiency of a private industry, but still maintain the public good. And I think that's what we're losing now is honestly, some gatekeepers on the public good. Some of the key kind of take-homes overall is how important history is in shaping our innovation culture. And I think we see that a little bit even in our irrigated zones here, where the adoption of zero tillage has been a little bit lower. Guess what? There's quite a few European farmers over here that are farming the irrigated lands, and that culture comes with it. That culture of rugged independence is also important to consider, that the farmers that are still in business have been selected over the last century or so, and they're independent. And the problem is that we can't do that anymore. We have to figure out how to work together as the industry is becoming, in many ways, smaller and smaller. I've mentioned this already, but when you look at the fact that I can put every country of Europe into Canada, land is our advantage. And even in the biggest countries in Europe, like when visitors come to Canada and look out in the prairies, they're awestruck. And we have such a tremendous potential. But they invest individually each so much more than we do. It's unfortunate in some ways, but having always been a science person, this trip has really opened my eyes up to the importance of policy. And the European farm to fork policy is, it's pretty wild. Like, they're promoting 25% organic. Funny enough, the organic folks hate that because they just took their premium out of the market. They're taking land out of production. They're reducing fertilizers by 20%, pesticides by 50%. And as you put together a national or a continental policy that encourages this, you can see that obviously the efforts are going to be towards reducing production. And that can have some pretty serious consequences. And I showed you those pictures of the tilled land in France, and I wondered how could this be sustainable, and happened to find a quote from a scientist at the University of Saskatoon that kind of hit my experience. He says, opposing paths has been selected in the EU and Canada. The evidence to date confirms that Canadian agriculture production that is increasingly sustainable. The government must learn the right lessons from Europe's mistakes when adopting strategies for reducing emissions from our agricultural sector. Canada should continue to improve sustainability through innovation. Canada should not follow Europe's failed attempts to reduce emissions by producing less food. So that's from Stuart Smith. That kind of hits home. And I think I understand why farmers get riled up when we start talking about climate change policy. But on the flip side, this is a global thing. People are really interested in reducing our impact on climate. So it can't be ignored. Having gone through my travels at the end of COVID, right at the onset of the Ukraine war, Brexit wasn't happening as well. You can see that these policies are going to be impacted by major events. And this fellow that I was visiting, he had kind of a pasture-raised chicken farm. Well, I looked at his eggs in the market there, and he had to put a sticker over on it that said farm raised because of avian influenza. So, you can design models around everything we want, but sometimes things drastically can change. This is in New Zealand, sort of that picturesque grazing. They're really good at growing grass. That's their competitive advantage. The farm that I stayed on here had 88 different paddocks that they rotated daily. So we talk about rotational grazing. Sounds like everything all the Gen Aggers are jumping up and down about. It's perfect. Until I saw that they're having major nitrate contamination issues across the entire country, and then now have mandated nitrogen fertilizer limits. So even when we think we have perfect systems set up, I think in this case, The challenge was actually the cattle. So it's all of the cattle urine that goes through a volcanic soil that gets into the groundwater. So now they have to rethink their agriculture. They also spread fertilizer by helicopter, but because I'm short on time, I'll skip this video. Unless you really want to see it. Skip it. All right, we'll see it. So I just happened to come across this guy and I stopped to say, hey, you mind if I watch? They got their quick release loader up thinger. And then he's off again. So they do this because they've got a lot of rolly land and it's hard to get bigger equipment across it. But you could also imagine a practice like this might cause a little bit of off-site contamination too. As it pelted my car underneath. So the other, I visited the famous dude, Alan Savory. I didn't even know who the hell he was, but I was having barbecued kudo with him around a fire in Zimbabwe. And he was really one of the first guys to get going on sort of the holistic movement in grazing. And it didn't take long to recognize that it was also a business. You know, we tend to get into these value-based, ideological-based movements, and even almost somewhat anti-science. And I do think science it's got its challenges, but we've got this global business now that is focused on climate change. So we have to be cautious with stories and continue to maintain science as a backing, but understand that there's other forces at play. And that all of our policies, you know, if we can increase the price of food and we can afford to take land out of production, and then you go to a country where, you know, there's, I think it was 95% unemployment and people starving, it's a different story. So I like to talk about the system. I'm going to go through this quickly, but I think our ag extension is basically decimated. Our education system in agriculture is struggling. I don't know what's going on with our research system. I think Ag Canada is almost getting out of the game of farmer-based or field-based trials, and they're not allowed to interact, so I think that's a challenge. We do have, you know, good producer groups, but the amount of dollars that they put into it relatively is quite small. Our input suppliers probably have the best relationships with farmers, and I'm starting to see at least a little bit of effort in putting together some unbiased work, like not just selling products that don't provide value to farmers. And then probably the big wild card is the government policy. Like, I know we like to get upset about things that go on in Ottawa, but comparatively we're pretty free to do what we want to in agriculture, and I think that's one of our competitive advantages. But I'd be on the lookout for climate change policies, and I think we need to be a part of it. So we can't just sort of let these things happen without our input. And I do think there's a bigger role for not-for-profits, you know, staying focused on regional areas or in topics that can help fill some of those voids and bridge the gaps. And lately, we've been seeing a lot of investment from charitable foundations into agriculture, and it is tied to climate change. So I think we need to look at them as partners as well. So to wrap it all up and put the grain in the bin, I have some recommendations for Canada. And basically is we need a revamped agricultural innovation system and strategy. Nothing small. There has been some effort on a sustainable ag strategy that's sort of been quieted lately since all of the debates on carbon tax. I think that is potentially a step in the right direction, but I think we also need to have the innovation system to support it. Basically, I think we need to depoliticize innovation and genuinely collaborate, and I don't think that's happening anymore. And we need to reconnect with farmers' needs through these innovation models. That's probably the biggest one. And it needs to be, you know, we need policies that are science-based and regionally specific. And we've saw that through the off-calf program, promoting cover crops into dry areas that really it doesn't work. So I think that's just a really good example of why it needs to be regionally specific. I think we need to empower grassroots innovation hubs. We need to modernize governance models that enable effective management. And I think another one that we don't talk enough about is a human capital strategy, because we're seeing, you know, fewer and fewer people get interested in agriculture, fewer and fewer people staying, and we want the smartest brains in this industry. It's probably the most complex industry out there. But, you know, colleges are struggling to attract students, and, you know, I keep hearing from farmers that they don't have a workforce that can manage the technology that they're implementing in their farms. So basically, yeah, we have to attract leaders as well. And here's a little story just on that innovation front. I happened to take my kids to the Westlock Tractor Museum and came across this fancy little gizmo that is the first stripper header. Started in 1893. Unfortunately, it was in Australia. But we think we're innovators now because we're using them. Well, if we're adding value, then we are. And so this is a practice here that has been slowly adopted in Western Canada from old technology. So it doesn't have to be shiny and new. It has to be used in the right way. We're here to help as an organization. Our motto is we change the way people farm. And if there's ever anything you guys want to work on or hear from along that innovation front, please give us a call. And we've got a team that can actually get some work done now. So that's pretty awesome. And I'd like to thank all of them for their hard work and their passion. I think that's the best thing that we have going for us at Farming Smarter is the people. So thank you very much. Did I use all my time? More went over, didn't I?
Perfect, actually, for 3 minutes.
Okay.
Are there any questions for Ken? We do have a couple of minutes before break. Oh, sorry. Do we have a microphone?
Thanks,
Are we creating a super weed by with all the chemicals and that we use, trying to support something like wheat, canola, or whatever? But the weeds are getting chemical tolerant. So in other words, we're circumventing nature because nature will choose the strongest will survive. We're trying to make the weakest survive.
I think that's a really good example to bring up. We're always having to adapt our practices. And the more we rely on one approach, sure, nature will find a way. And I imagine you're referring to our kochia epidemic and, you know, all the other ones too. With drought, I think those weeds are exemplified, and they're the ones that survive when we don't have crop competition. But we also have very few people working on it. I mean, we had kochia projects with Ag Canada that we couldn't put through because we were at capacity. So I don't think we're putting enough effort into those types of projects that matter. I do think that's, it's a perfect example of where we employ one simple strategy, it's going to backfire. And yeah, it's starting to be a pretty darn big problem. Yep.
Any more questions? Oh, we have a question on Slido.
On Slido, there is a lot of innovation in agriculture. Precision agriculture is one part of innovation. What is the adoption rate of precision agriculture globally?
I am not a human statistic machine.
B?
There's always lots of interest in precision agriculture, but I don't think it's as highly adopted as we might think. And it depends on your definition of it as well. Like here in Canada, we're using auto steer and rate controllers and that sort of stuff. Funny enough, New Zealand was supposed to be the country that had the most adoption of variable rate irrigation. So we had papers that we quoted in proposals, but when I went there, it wasn't really the variable rate that I expected. So it's difficult to really pinpoint. For them, they had a quarter of their field was in pasture, and then a quarter of it was in corn or something. So that was their definition of variable rate. And to me, that's not really what I was expecting. So I don't think that the technologies are good, but they often overpromise and underdeliver.
Thank you.
Okay, can you join me in thanking Ken for his presentation?